So recently, I've heard that some of the High Guard devs have been speaking about the game's poor reception, finding various reasons for why it flopped and whatnot, and while I don't agree with all of them, I think that there are at least a few points that we can all say are pretty valid. Like, let's be real here, the Game Awards definitely did not do this game any favors. Like, I'm sorry, Jeff, but you cannot introduce a game in the same breath as mentioning Titanfall and expect people to be happy if that game is literally anything other than Titanfall 3. I mean, hell, even when it was abundantly clear while I was first watching this trailer that the game was not a Titanfall game, I still remember holding my breath hoping that one of these fantasy characters was about to yell something like, "Prepare for Golem Fall," and summon like a giant fire elemental that they could pilot like a mech or something like that. But regardless, I don't want to turn this into yet another video just beating the dead horse that is High Guard, because to be frank, I think that this problem is so much bigger than any one genre. I mean, just think about it. We have seen so many of these live service games just come out and crash and burn practically overnight in just the last few years alone. Obviously, High Guard is the one that reminded everybody of Concord, but just recently, at just around the same time as all this High Guard stuff, we're also currently seeing 2XKO go through another round of massive layoffs and budget cuts and whatnot, despite it just hitting their 1.0 release and console launch just a few weeks ago. But of course, looking back over the years, just off the top of my head, I mean, I remember that there was that terrible vampire shooter Redfall that Arcane was forced to pump out. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was hated pretty much the moment it was shown off. Babylon's Fall was a travesty for Platinum. Multiversus was another example of a game basically unlaunching and then somehow relaunching in an even worse state than it already was. Like, the list just goes on with so many live service bombs, failed MMOs, basically every new IP that came out of Amazon Game Studios. Like, the question becomes, why are all of these games failing? Because it's clearly not just an issue with a couple of games making some bad design decisions. Like, are they just all making the same mistakes over and over again? Or is there more going on than that? And if so many of these live service games keep failing, then why do they keep trying to even make them in the first place? Well, right off the bat, a big part of the problem with live service games is basically a concept called the attention economy. Now, I've seen some people refer to this idea in more sarcastic terms, but I do think it is a very real concept when at least talking about live service games specifically. Basically, when you have, say, like a normal game, ultimately, it doesn't really matter as much when you get around to playing it. For instance, famously, the Horizon games, Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, have been cursed to keep releasing right around when a much bigger and more anticipated franchise releases a competing game. The first game released right around the same time as Breath of the Wild, and the second game was bulldozed over by Elden Ring. And yet, despite that, the Horizon games are actually still quite successful. Combined, they've sold like 40 million copies, and deservedly so in my opinion. I really like those games, because ultimately, while yeah, those competing releases almost certainly stalled a lot of the initial interest in that series, once you beat Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring or whatever, nothing is stopping you from just going back and playing Horizon while it's in your backlog. Like, the game will still be there and won't have meaningfully changed by the time you get around to playing it. But live service games are different. If a live service game runs up against some direct competition, well, then we run into a problem, because live service games are not meant to simply be beaten before you move on to the next game. They are literally meant to be played forever. And they are almost universally online multiplayer-focused titles, which means that they can only function as a game as long as there are a large number of other people playing it at basically all times. So basically, for example, when Call of Duty and Battlefield release their new entries around the same time as each other, very few people are ever going to actually play both of them, despite them aiming for very similar markets. But they literally just don't have enough time in the day to actually play both of these games at the same time, even if you actually like both of them. Especially if we're talking about more casual players who might have an actual, full-time job or family to take care of. have. They might literally only have like an hour a day, if that, to dedicate to hobbies like gaming. So if they choose to spend that hour playing Call of Duty, then that means they're not spending that time playing Battlefield and vice versa. Even if at some point they decide to stop playing Call of Duty to make the switch to Battlefield, then that means that Call of Duty has directly lost an active player, and thus the game has a smaller player base because of that. So live service games are just inherently going to be a lot more competitive against each other than normal offline games, and waiting to play one of them could literally mean that the game dies before you get a chance to play it yourself. I mean, there could literally have been people who were just on vacation for a couple of weeks when Concord came out and were super looking forward to playing it, and by the time they got back home, Concord was literally already dead. I mean, it's probably didn't happen, but it's a funny scenario to think about. Meanwhile, waiting to buy a single-player game could literally mean getting just a better product thanks to bug fixes and content patches that get added over time. Not to mention, you might even get it for a cheaper price when it goes on sale. I mean, just look at what happened with Cyberpunk and Phantom Liberty. So the live service scene is just an inherently riskier market to try and push into. And this is why it was so absurdly insane to me when we found out that Sony was producing like 17 different live service titles in the pipeline at the same time when Concord failed. Because at that point, it doesn't even matter how good the games are. Even if every single one of those live service games was a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, or at the very least as good as like Helldivers, they would inevitably cannibalize each other's player bases. Because by the time you release like your 4th or 5th successful live service game, then either the new ones won't be able to find players because they'll all be too busy playing the older ones, or if the new ones do find players, then it'll only come at the expense of losing players from those older games. It doesn't make sense to have that many live service games at once, and that's even before you consider the fact that they're also competing with games from other publishers. Now, sure, to be fair, there is some wiggle room if you try to aim for different audiences. For example, there's a lot of competition to get players between Call of Duty and Battlefield since they're both targeting a similar demographic, but I doubt that most of those players are interested in playing a game like Hearthstone or Final Fantasy XIV or anything like that. But there's only so many markets to chase, and most of them already have dominant titles, whether you're talking about MMOs or Battle Royales or MOBAs or whatever. So even though you could try to aim for different markets, I still feel like having 17 live service titles in development at once is really just excessive. And like, even despite this market diversity that could exist, so many studios seem to want to go for the quickest, sturdiest option of trying to get the best live service shooter. So it's like when a new game comes out like Highguard, even if Highguard was an amazing title, it's launching into the most flooded market possible, since it now has to compete with the likes of Fortnite and Call of Duty and Helldivers and Overwatch and Battlefield, and you get the picture. Like, this is honestly a big reason why I think Deadlock has succeeded so well where so many other live service games are failing. Sure, the MOBA genre does have two very dominant games with League of Legends and Dota 2 that have been at the top of the leaderboard for basically as long as the genre has existed, but rather infamously, both of those big MOBAs are incredibly difficult for a new player to get into at this point, with hundreds of champions and so many intricate mechanics that just keep getting added to the games over the years. It's just an absolutely terrible onboarding process. Most of the people playing those games are themselves longtime veterans, with very few new players being brought in with every year, whereas Deadlock, while it is still a very complicated game, it is a hell of a lot easier to get into with how it simplifies a lot of unintuitive MOBA mechanics, and it helps that it disguises its gameplay in the more intuitive form of a hero shooter. Hell, it might be even worth doing another analysis of Deadlock with some of the recent updates they've added and talking about how I think they onboard new players, but I digress. digress. The point I'm trying to get at is that the games industry literally just cannot support this infinite series of new live service games. So it's always inevitable that the majority of these games are going to flounder and struggle to find an audience, even regardless of how good they are. Like, it's a kind of a zero-sum game. Either they won't be able to draw enough players away from existing games in order to survive, or the only way they can survive is by leeching players from those games and indirectly killing them in the process. The other big thing to consider is the fact that live service games are also usually the most expensive to produce in the first place, and especially the most expensive to keep running. So it can be a huge gamble to even make one of these things in the first place. Like, not only do you have to design a big multiplayer-focused game that is designed explicitly to be played endlessly, but because we're also talking about online games, that means you also need to rent out dedicated server infrastructure so you can actually make those online systems function for large numbers of players, and those servers cost money to keep working. This is arguably the main reason why these games keep getting shut down at a record pace. If you need to keep shelling out tons of money to keep those servers online, and you're not pulling in enough money to do that, well, then it's not worth it to keep the game running. After all, the way that this works is that you need to get a constant influx of players to be spending money at regular intervals in order to be able to afford to pay for all of those servers. If you don't have that steady source of income, well, then you're not going to be able to keep your game alive. And obviously you then need to also have a profit on top of that to even justify its existence. And you can't just have a live service game that never updates with new content. So as well, on top of the server costs, you need to keep adding new characters, new weapons, new maps, new whatever it is that your game needs to keep people playing and keep drawing in new players and keep them opening up their wallets, which means that development doesn't just stop when the game launches. You have to keep paying a team of developers, maybe a smaller team than the original developer team, but you still need a team of developers to keep making that new content for, well, ever, at least until the game's player base drops off enough that it's no longer profitable to keep supporting the game. And so as a result, that's why we keep seeing these massive layoffs surrounding these live service games, like we just saw with Highguard and 2XKO. If a game starts to do poorly, well, there are two sources of large ongoing costs that you can try to minimize: the server infrastructure and the employees. And well, technically the game can remain functional as long as you keep the servers online. So naturally, these greedy CEOs just see laying off employees as a way to cut down on costs. Now, to be fair, I do think that it is worth chiming in here to point out that we could reduce the server costs quite easily by simply implementing private servers, as you may have heard about from the Stop Killing Games movement. But of course, the main issue here is also related to corporate greed. See, while it costs nothing to maintain a private server, since you're basically offloading the cost onto your customers, it also gives a lot of power to your customers. So if you try to sell a skin for $20, then chances are someone can just make a private server where that skin, or at least something like it, is available for everyone on the server for free, not to mention all the other mods that they could implement. This is great for games preservation, of course, and it allows people to keep enjoying a game even after the original devs shut down their official servers. So for that reason alone, I obviously still support the Stop Killing Games movement and everything that it's doing, and I wish Ross good luck on that front. But from the mindset of a greedy corporate CEO, of course, they have zero financial incentive to implement private servers, even though they are cheaper, because they can always make more money through the microtransactions of their live service game. Thus, it always ends up being the employees that get gutted first instead of the servers. So naturally, the big question at the end of the day is, why do these companies keep trying to make these live service games in the first place? I mean, they're massive investments that cost huge amounts of money both to develop and maintain after they're released. They exist in a hyper-competitive market where you might end up even competing with your own other products, let alone other publishers and developers, due to how much attention they demand from their players, and they're just overall hard to make in the first place. Well, this is by far the easiest question to answer because, again, the simplest answer is just corporate greed. At the end of the day, it's basically like playing the lottery. If you manage to make a wildly successful live service game, then you can keep your entire company afloat off of the profits for years, if not decades. I mean, just look at Fortnite. That game alone is arguably the main reason why Epic has been able to afford almost everything that it has been doing for the last few years. Or if you can make the next Fortnite or the next World of Warcraft or whatever, then your company is practically set for life, or at least a decade or two. So that's almost certainly why you have companies like Sony trying to crank out literally dozens of these live service games at once. If they can get just one or two winners like Helldivers 2, then they'll be golden for a long time. But of course, the issue is that while pumping out more live service games increases your odds of at least one of them hitting it big, it also all but guarantees that the vast majority of them are going to crash and burn for all of the reasons I've laid out already. They are willingly sacrificing so many countless games and entire studios just to chase that small chance of getting that Fortnite level of success. But the other thing is that ultimately, there is more to success than just making a ton of money. I know, it sounds crazy if you're a greedy tech CEO, but it's true. I mean, speaking of, since I just brought it up not too long ago, how many of you actually heard about Helldivers before a couple years ago? Not the sequel, I'm talking the original Helldivers. The reason why the game that everyone knows today has a 2 in it? Statistically speaking, you almost certainly didn't hear about it, and that's because its peak player count was around the same as where everybody was saying that Highguard was already a failure, with only a few thousand players, and for most of its lifespan, Helldivers 1 had less than 1,000 concurrent players, barring a couple of free weekends and major updates that would occasionally push it into 4 digits for a short period of time. By all metrics, it was by far not a popular game, and if it was released today with those numbers, it would have almost certainly gotten the same treatment that studios like the one behind Highguard and 2XKO and Concord and whatnot would have gotten, being shut down almost immediately, or at the very least forcing them to stop supporting the game and making them work on something else. But clearly Sony, or at least the Sony of 2016, must have seen some potential in it, and they were smart to do so, because by retaining Arrowhead and funding them to work on a sequel, they allowed them to flourish and grow into a real powerhouse of an IP that it is today. This is why I always get so mad whenever I'm reminded of how Xbox killed Hi-Fi Rush despite it being a moderate success. Sure, it's not a live service game, but the same principle applies. Hi-Fi Rush might not have been the super mega hit that Microsoft wanted, but it was still a decent success, and it was really popular and scored really well with critics and fans alike. I think we can, at least most of us, agree that Hi-Fi Rush was the best Xbox game to come out that year, and yet Microsoft shut it down because they don't see value in games being good if they don't bring in boatloads of cash at least. But there is value there in the long term. For one, Microsoft specifically has been bleeding IPs like crazy. Like, even classic mainstays like Halo are on life support at best, so killing Hi-Fi Rush means killing one of the few good reasons for people to even like Xbox as a brand, and it also kills any chance of that IP growing into something huge down the line like Helldivers 2 did. But there's also the employee side of things, which is another big problem that extends out well beyond the scope of any one game like Hi-Fi Rush, because these companies no longer value building up experience from working for them anymore. Like, if they kept on the devs of Hi-Fi Rush and let them make a sequel, then not only does that give the game a chance to build up even more fans and bring more people to the Xbox brand, but it also lets the employees themselves grow more skilled and experience over time, which means that the sequel could have better gameplay, better artwork, better music, better everything as everyone gets more experienced working there. Again, this is literally what happened with Helldivers. I mean, just look at the original versus its sequel. This isn't just the result of PlayStation throwing more money at them. This is clearly a team that has grown and evolved with a lot more skill over time. The sequel is not only a lot more flashy and big budget, it has way more detailed visuals. It has so many more details in the little things like the reload animations and enemy behaviors. It's overall just a much more, clever and competently put together game that is clearly the result of a lot of built up skill over time. This is what happens when you actually foster studios and employees and help them grow more skilled with time instead of just canning them the second they don't make you a boatload of cash and hoping to hire someone else that does. And let's be real here, trying to chase the success of games like Fortnite is just kind of a fool's errand in the first place. I mean, it really is less about the quality of the game, and a lot more of it is about timing and luck. Hell, even Fortnite itself mostly just got lucky due to its circumstances. Like, I don't know how many of you actually remember this, but Fortnite was originally kind of a generic zombie shooter with a really basic base building mechanic. Like, it was kind of okay at best, but it definitely was not going to see the kinds of serious success that it would get later in its life. But it also came out right when a bunch of other Battle Royale games started getting super popular, like PUBG and DayZ and whatnot. And so naturally, Fortnite ended up copying their homework and releasing their own Battle Royale mode, incorporating some of the building mechanics into it to try and make it stand apart. And even then, it's arguable that the main reason why Fortnite took off at that point is because the existing Battle Royales of the time were all very new and pretty janky with very slow updates, and Fortnite was the first big battle royale to smooth over a lot of those things. Like, I'm not trying to invalidate the effort that the devs put into that game, but let's be real here, Fortnite was mostly a product of its circumstances, and part of the problem with this live service trend chasing is that you cannot simply release another game like that in a post-Fortnite world. Like, if Fortnite had launched today in the state that it was in when it first became a battle royale, it would probably flop just like all the other games that we've been talking about, because once one of these games succeeds, they're able to funnel a lot of that success into making the game bigger and better over time, which in turn makes it all that much harder to compete with them, because now all of these new games that are trying to enter the market, they don't have the Fortnite level of money that has allowed Fortnite to grow into the juggernaut that it has become, and in turn, it makes it that much more foolish when you have these CEOs just throwing entire development teams at the problem and hoping that they somehow manage to make another Fortnite level success. But of course, the CEO is never at risk of being laid off when none of this works out. They'll still be paid oodles of cash while they sacrifice another few hundred employees on the bonfire that is this live service trend, while the moronic leaders themselves that forced them to work on that project, like, just get away scot-free, even though the project was doomed to fail from the start, all to chase that 1 in a million chance at success in an already hilariously overcrowded market. But with that rant out of the way, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. By all means, let me know what your thoughts are on the live service epidemic of the last decade or so. It's honestly kind of funny to me, because every few years we get another clueless CEO that tries to claim that, single-player games are just not in style anymore and it's not worth making them, but, like, it really just feels like making, normal, like, single-player video games is just a much safer and more reliable market than continuing to pointlessly chase these live service trends. But feel free to let me know what your thoughts are down below. And as always, if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. If you want to help support the channel more directly, there's a link to my Ko-Fi in the description down below. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.